Hi, welcome. My name is Emily. I'm the Interim Director of Public Programs, Education, and Community Engagement, and I am so excited that all of you turned out on this very hot evening for a really fabulous talk. I'm not going to speak too much about the talk today. Robert will be talking a little bit more about that, but I just want to tell you a little bit about how this fits into all of our programming. How many of you have been to one of our public programs before? Great. So this is the first time for the rest of you? That's fabulous. So Friends of the Highline has a robust calendar of public programs. We have programs for every age, from 0 to 99 or 120, depending on how long you plan to live. And we would love for you to join us for more of our programs. So please make sure that you sign up. You'll be entered into a raffle when you do. And when you came today, you also received a note card. That's for any questions you might have during the talks. And at the end, we'll be having a Q&A where we'll be reading those off. This talk today is part of a series called Beyond the Highline, which is about different uses of public space, both predominantly in the United States, but today we'll also be touching on public space around the world. This is the second year that we've done these talks. Last year, we featured the Bloomingdale Trail in Chicago, various public spaces in Detroit, the Low Line in New York's Lower East Side, and the Lafayette Corridor in New Orleans. And last month, we had a talk with the Reading Viaduct in Philadelphia. And if you like this talk, I hope you'll come back on September 23rd, when James Corner Field Operations and Eloise Hirsch from the Department of Parks will be speaking about Freshkills landfill and how they're turning that into a large public park. So I am very excited to welcome our media partner, Next City.
Thanks so much for that. I'm Diana Lind. I'm editor-in-chief of Next City. For those of you who don't know of us, we're a nonprofit media organization that covers best practices in cities around the world. I'm really trying to link advocates here and abroad by sharing great ideas and getting people to kind of know what's happening in cities in a range of areas, ranging from economic development to urban water infrastructure to arts and culture and public spaces. And as a media partner for this project, Beyond the Highline, we are we're posting previews, recaps, and a little bit of information about each of these talks. And it's a great way to kind of get a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at some of these events and a little bit more information about them. So tonight, we're going to be doing a little bit of live tweeting at nextcity.org. The hashtag is HighlineTalks. And the questions for this evening's program will also be fielded by the Highline's Twitter feed, which is at HighlineNYC. So hopefully you'll participate both in person and online as well. And we look forward to seeing you on our webpage also. Thanks so much. And now I'll introduce Robert Hammond.
Hi, and I want to make sure that everyone gets one of these cards, because just to make clear, I have two, because I'm going to have more than one question and we might not get to all the questions, but we'll submit them after our panelists are finished speaking. So I'm really honored to have both of our panelists here today. I feel like they're giants in their field, and not only are I think change the way public space is happening in New York City and all over the world, but really I think changing people's lives. And I think that's what's so interesting is, and this is my personal opinion, one of the things I'm excited what they've done is that I think it's energized people to see how public space can literally change lives. And so that's, I don't know, very personally exciting to me, and I'm curious to hear them talk with each other. Enrique Peñalosa is an urban strategist whose vision and proposals have significantly influenced policies in numerous cities throughout the world. He's currently living with us here in New York and president of the board of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy of New York City. He's lectured and talked to governments all over the world, and his ideas have been featured in some of the world's most important city plans. It has influenced the way I think we think about cities today. MacArthur Genius Fellow and Peabody Award-winning radio broadcaster Majora Carter founded and led the groundbreaking environmental equality nonprofit Sustainable South Bronx from 2001 and 2008. leading the way for city and state policy direction on green infrastructure, urban forestry, and land use. She wrote a successful $1.25 million federal DOT planning grant for the South Bronx Greenway, which went on to garner over $50 million in its first phase in construction funds, and then spearheaded the creation of a national award-winning parks in one of the poorest congressional districts of the U.S. Since then, she's consulted worldwide on how to enrich the lives of residents in economically underperforming communities, and her current work includes real estate development designed to help Americans move out of poverty, as well as teach education, entrepreneurship, and talent pipeline development. And this talk came out of, I was giving a lunch talk at a conference, and Majora asked, and most of the questions were pretty softball, easy questions, but Majora really came up with some of the questions that I think are important of things that we're talking about right now, about how to make the High Line, a place for everyone, not just in our community, but in our city. And so I'm actually looking forward to hearing her thoughts next. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Enrique is first, so.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank very much the High Line and people who had to do with this invitation, Diane Lind, Robert, all of you, Maria. And I'd like to say, first of all, that I love New York, that I think is the most fantastic city in the planet, the greatest parks, but of course, to make this interesting, I have to make some suggestions of things that could be perhaps different. And I will make reference to some of the things we did in Bogotá, because that's what I am expected to do sometimes. But mostly, I like to talk about public pedestrian space. And that has to do with the way cities are made. And this is the way a city is a means to a way of life. When we discuss urbanism, we are not discussing some kind of architecture issues. We are discussing how do we want to live. I like this picture. Why? Because when we see planet Earth from space, then it's very clear that this is just a self-sufficient spaceship which we all share, and so we feel so close to each other, the Chinese, the Russians, the Colombians. But once we come down, it's very clear we are not so close to each other. For Colombians, it's very difficult to get visas to go anywhere in the world, for example. And then we go to our country, and then we realize most of it is private property. We cannot go in because we may get killed, actually. We can get shot if we go into private property. We go to our city, and then most of it is private buildings. If we go in, we may get killed. And if we go into the street, we also get killed by cars. So what I am trying to emphasize is that out of the whole planet, of the whole universe, the only microscopic piece to which we have access is public pedestrian space in our city. This is the only piece of the planet to which we have access. It's an extremely important piece. And I would propose that what really makes a better city are its public spaces. Sidewalks, plazas, parks, waterfront promenades. Before anything else, this is what makes a great city. Pedestrian spaces are also powerful means to construct equality. Because low-income people, that's the only alternative that they have for their free time. And also because sometimes it's a place also for rich and poor to meet as equals. What is wrong with our cities today? I would say that human life is permanently threatened. We are afraid of getting killed by cars. If we go down here to 14th Street, we are afraid that we may get killed. If we tell a 3-year-old child, watch out, a car, the child will jump in fright. And with a good reason, because there are tens of thousands of children who are killed by cars every year in the world cities. But the most amazing thing is not that this is so, but that we think this is normal. But this is progress, that this is the way life is. This was not always like this. For thousands of years, we have had cities for 5,000 years, and children could go without fear of getting killed in an old city. But in New York, in the first 3 months of this year, in New York, up to January, February, and March, 45 pedestrians and bicyclists were killed, and more than 3,590 people were injured. So this is not, the most amazing thing is that we think this is normal. This is the way life is. And I believe perhaps this is wrong, that we can make cities that are totally different towards the future. Now, a good city, I love the definition of Jan Gehl, a wonderful Danish urbanist, is one where people want to be out. People love to be outside. People love to be in sidewalks. People love to be in parks. People love to be, that's a great city. We need to walk. We are pedestrian animals. Just as birds need to fly or deer need to run, we need to walk. We could survive inside an apartment all our life. We don't need to walk in order to survive. We need to walk in order to be happy. And of course, it's much better if we can walk in a place like the High Line, where we are not in fear of getting killed, where a child can be left alone and is in no danger. And it's much better to have a 20-meter wide sidewalk than a 2-meter wide sidewalk. These are things that I cannot prove to you mathematically. It's something that you feel in your heart and in your soul, especially if you are with a child. The bigger the sidewalk, the slower the cars, the better it is for the people. I would say that a good city is one that is good for the most vulnerable citizens, such as children, the elderly, the handicapped, the poor. If it's good for the most vulnerable citizens, it tends to be good for everybody else. For the elderly, for children. Now, this is a picture very common in the developing world. What this picture shows, of course, is that there is no sidewalk. But this shows beyond that, that there is no democracy. Because what this picture is showing is that people in cars are more important than people who walk. That we have first-class citizens who have cars and third-class citizens who walk. And this is what we have all over the developing world. Not even children, school children, are more important than parked cars. But this is not Africa. This is a high-income New York suburb where they don't have sidewalks either. They thought it was very elegant to design suburbs without sidewalks. This is Colombia. Bogotá was a mess. Cars parking where there should be sidewalks all over the place. When I became mayor, it was war. I got tens of thousands of cars off the sidewalks. I used to have my hair black before these battles. Very difficult. And we got tens of thousands of cars out, and we built sidewalks. I was almost impeached. Huge amount of money was collected to collect signatures to impeach me because people were used to parking on sidewalks, even though it was only 15 or 20% of households who had cars. They were the richest and most powerful households. And of course, the low-income people were not conscious that this was for them, so I had no backing from them either. It was very painful. I even had to send my daughter to live in Canada for a year at one point. I had 80%, 85% negative image. But this is not my own fight. Everywhere where you fight for pedestrian space at the expense of car space, you have difficulties, including New York, and we're going to get to that. People used to tell me, Mayor, don't be so stubborn, because there is enough space in sidewalks to have parking bays or to park cars next to them, and still there is enough space for people to walk by. So we had to have a TV commercial explaining. We tend to think that sidewalks are relatives of streets because they live next to each other. But in fact, sidewalks are not like streets for going from one place to another. Sidewalks are for playing, for talking, for kissing. Sidewalks really are much closer relatives of parks than they are of streets. And to say that there is enough space in a sidewalk for people to walk by and there is enough space for cars to be parked next to it is equally absurd as to say that we can turn the main park or the main parking or the main plaza in a city into an open-air parking lot so long as we leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. So clearly, again, we are in subjective issues. How wide should sidewalks be? So we build sidewalks, as big as they could be built. Now, This is a very important question for urban design and for democracy. I would say this may be the most important urban design question, with all due respect. The most valuable resource a city has is its road space. We could find diamonds or gold or oil under Manhattan, and it would never be as valuable as its road space, the space between buildings. The question is, how should we distribute this space between pedestrians, bicycles, public transport, and cars? There is not a technical answer. We cannot just call some transport expert to tell us. This is a political decision. Look at this. How should we distribute this space? This is in India. Or here, look at this. They make this horrible flyover in India, and then they forget to put sidewalks next to it. But this is very common in the developing world. This is London. Look at this. This is bigger, more space for pedestrians than for cars. This is not because some transport expert gave permission to the mayor of London to do this. This is a political decision. How do we distribute? If we give more space to cars, there will be more cars. If we give less space to cars, there is less cars. As simple as that. Now, we should remember that an adult with a car has no more right to road space than a child. Road space belongs to every human being in a city. Now, why do cities, including New York, give more space to parked cars than to people? Did somebody vote on this? Or was just somebody assumed that this is the way it should be? Why don't we get rid of this parking, this street parking, in some places at least, and to make bigger sidewalks or protected bicycle ways? Why don't we vote on this? We should remember something. Constitutions have many rights. The right to education, the right to housing, the right to work, but not the right to park. Parking is not a constitutional right in any constitution that I know of. So we could easily, now, why not get rid of these parked cars? On the way here, I took a bus from Union Square to here, and the bus would not move because the cars were parked on the street. This is the most irrational, anti-democratic thing in the world, because the bus should go in an exclusive lane very fast and not take 20 minutes to come from Union Square to here. Now, and here in New York, where there has been wonderful things done, they take the big political battle to put the bikeways, and then why not do physically protected? Because otherwise, cars will park on them like this, A bikeway which cannot be safely used by a 9-year-old child, I would say, is not really yet a fully bikeway. This is what happens with these painted bikeways all over the place. Now, there was a battle very near here in 10th Street. They put a bikeway. And then the neighbors said they didn't want it because they got rid in a couple of streets of parking. And so the neighbors protested. And so they took away the bikeway. So you see here, the bikeway is fading away slowly, in 10th Street. Why? My question is, this is a question for you. Do neighbors have more a say in deciding what to do with the public space than people who live far away? Do neighbors of Central Park have more of a right to Central Park than children in the Bronx? I don't think this is a very democratic principle which tends to be applied in the US all the time, that neighbors have more of a say of what to do with public space. Of course, if it is a bikeway, if it was a road that was being built, I'm sure neighbors would not be able to oppose it. But since it's a bikeway, so this is an interesting question to decide. And I don't think this is a very democratic thing, that we should give more of a right to neighbors to decide what to do with public space than people who may be poorer, who live farther away. Now, is public space a frivolity in a city with much poverty? I would not say so. This is horrible poverty in Bogotá. But during wartime, rich and poor, the manager of the company or the lowest paid employee are more or less equally happy. The differences fell during leisure time, when the upper income person goes to a big house, to country clubs, to vacations, and the poor person goes to a very small house. sometimes just a room, and the only alternative for them and their children is public pedestrian space. Therefore, the least of the least that a democratic society should provide is high-quality public pedestrian space, because it's the only alternative low-income people have to television. They don't have country clubs or vacations or restaurants. So important are parks that I'll show you some interesting picture. In this very poor slum in the hillsides of Bogotá, where people put their homes in the hill, the only little level land, the only piece of level land, they did not build houses on it. They saved it for a playground, for a sports field, because they, even to them who are so poor, they need to have some parks, some sport facility. Look at this picture. This is what we did in Bogotá. This is the space for children. And I'll show you the next picture is the same, a little farther. The space for cars. So we build the parks and the sidewalks, and I would have loved to pave these streets for cars too, but first we did the parks and the playgrounds, and later the pavement for cars. Most people in these low-income neighborhoods don't have cars anyway. Of course, I would love to pave these streets as well, but if you don't have enough money, what do you do first? I would say that in the future, poor will have everything the rich have now, computers, iPods, iPads. What they will not have, unless we do something about it, is access to green, unless we save land. Other problems can be solved in the future, but if we do not save land for parks in the future, it's very difficult to demolish hundreds of hectares to create parks in the future. So developing country cities which are growing 5, 10-fold over the next 40 years, they have to save land for parks. It's crucial for people's happiness in the future. New York has done wonderful improvements to its public space. High Line, Hudson River Park, East River Park, I mean, all kinds of wonderful, but its sidewalks, which are the backbone of public space, have some problems. I mean, sometimes people think this is wonderful, very democratic. I think this is a disaster, what is happening with vending in New York sidewalks. This is not helping the poor. The poor are those who need the most public space. The rich people can go to expensive malls, to vacations, to country clubs. This is destroying quality of life for low-income people. And this is not democratic, as people sometimes think. This is not helping the poor. This is destroying public space in New York. I mean, if vendors are so wonderful, why don't you let them take over the High Line? Or why don't they allow them all over in the malls, if they are so good for public space? Of course, it's not politically correct to say this, but the fact is that this is extremely bad for poor people. And poor people will not protest. Of course, you can have a few well-organized, but not this chaos like this. Now, of course, vendors in New York are also allowed with a touch of classism, because we do not find vendors on Madison Avenue or Park Avenue above 50th Street, not one. Or no vendors in public shared public space, such as Central Park, Hudson River Park, or the High Line. But this is discussion. If sidewalks deteriorate, malls will appear. And the malls are geared to some different incomes. And rich and poor will not continue to meet as equals in public space. Why can't sidewalks be as clean, as orderly as malls' corridors? We have to compete with malls. Public space has to be better than the malls' corridors. I'd like to show you some public pedestrian spaces we did in Bogotá, some works that we did. This was taken over totally in the center with a lot of crime and the vendors, and we opened this, we relocated. We paid these vendors and we relocated them, and we created this. 2 hectares from the presidential palace, 23 hectares totally taken by drug dealers and crime. We demolished 23 hectares, and we created a park there. Again, most of the investment was in social investment, not in physical investment. This is the most exclusive country club, golf club in Bogotá. We said that this should be turned into a public park, because there is no parks around, of course. We could not turn the whole park into a park, the whole club, but at least we turned the polo fields, 10 hectares, into a park. There is very much scarcity of land for parks. The Japanese Cooperation Agency said we should have an 8-lane highway in an area of Bogotá, and we built a 35-kilometer greenway linking some of the richest areas to some of the poorest areas of the city. Now, let's go into bicycling. Bicycling is almost like walking, like a more efficient way of walking. In bicycling, we meet as equals. Bicycling, I would say, is the future of cities in many ways. In Bogotá, there was not 1 meter of bikeways when we got there. Now more than 500,000 people ride bicycles every day there because we began to make protected bicycle ways, but 14 years ago. This is I would ask you, are protected bikeways or sidewalks a right or they are a cute architectural feature? I would say we know that sidewalks are a right, but it's not so clear yet with protected bicycle ways. I would say if we think that everybody has a right to safe mobility, even a child who only has the possibility of riding a bicycle, protected bicycle ways in every street should be considered a right. I will be very happy the day when somebody in a bicycle who is hit by a car sues government and gets many $1 million because he had a right to have a bicycle way everywhere in the city. But this, we are only beginning to go there. Also, in developing countries like Colombia, I would say that a citizen on a $30 bicycle, what a protected bicycle way says, expresses a symbol that says that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. What actually the bikeway does, besides protecting the people, is raising their social status, making them feel important, like he feels very important in this bicycle. Now, cars are very recent in human history. Let's go very quickly. We have had cities for 5,000 years, and we only have had cars for 90 or something like this. This is very advanced city. This is New York, 1905. It was pedestrian, no cars. Now, then we realized we had made a mess towards the end of the 20th century and began to make more spaces for people all over the place, more pedestrian streets. Manhattan has done wonderful things recently. But now, let's remember something. 80% of the cities which will exist in the year 2050, 80% is not yet built. We have yet to build. I mean, we are going to build like almost 5 times more cities in the next 40 years than we have built over the last 1,000 years. And we could have this ingredient. I'll show you a project that we did. This is a 25-kilometer bicycle highway that we built, again, like 14 years ago. Through some of the poorest areas of the city where the city was going to arrive very soon. And so, you see, it's a totally different way of organizing a city. Thousands of kilometers of these things. This is only 24 kilometers. We built about 70 kilometers of these things. Bicycle highways without cars next to them. See, like here, we don't have time to go into the details, but this is when we are, with no time, very quickly. This is just an interesting picture. Again, we see high-quality pedestrian spaces, no pavement for cars in the low-income neighborhoods. I would love to pay for cars again, but what do we do first? We are showing respect for human dignity. A lot of bike shops appear all over the place. So, as we did not invest much in roads for cars, so we had money to make schools and parks and this bikeway, this pedestrian highway, bicycle highway. Tens of thousands of people use it to go to work. Now, how would our quality of life in New York improve or anywhere in the world if we had, within a couple of blocks of our home, we would enter a 50-mile or a 100-mile bicycle highway only, without the noise of cars, safe for riding with a child or just to sit and read a paper and see bikers go by. I like to show you these numbers in the United States. The US has to build 74 million new homes over the next 38 years. So it's not just developing countries which are going to be building cities. You will have to build in the United States more homes than today exist in Britain, France, and Canada added together. So my question is only to you, who are many of you involved in urban design, where? Where are these houses going to be built? Where are these homes? And how? Why not have a different city where we can have thousands of miles of these bicycle and pedestrian-only roads crisscrossing the city? Greenways crisscrossing the city. Or imagine this greenway going across Manhattan all the way, all through the Bronx, all across New York. How about something like this? One pedestrian street, then one street for cars. One pedestrian, one for cars, Or are we going to do just the same that we have done? This environment where cars are killing people. That's what we think is wonderful. These new 70 million new homes that are going to be built in the United States, are they just going to be built the same way? Or can we do something radically different? Now, waterfronts, very quickly. Democracy is not just the fact that people vote. It's the fact that all citizens are equal before the law. It's the fact that public good prevails over private interest. So, imagine if public good prevails over private interest, should not thousands of miles of Long Island Sound waterfront should be public with a wonderful walkway bicycle path alongside it? I mean, there is much to do in the United States, too. It's not like everything is finished and perfect already in our cities. There are many things to be done. Of course, anything that is important is controversial. Now, ideally, of course, waterfronts should have pedestrian infrastructure, not cars, like here in London. We made a mess in the second half of the 20th century. We built highways next to all kinds of waterfronts. In Paris, they built this horrible highway next to the river. They closed it, and they closed it in the summer. The idea is they are going, in Seoul, they demolished this highway because they had this little creek underneath. In Spain, in Madrid, look what they did. This is difficult to see a little bit. They put underground in Madrid 7 miles of a highway, and they put a park above it. It was like this, and they did like this. Now, here in New York, when are we going to see FDR put underground in order to make a wonderful park in front of the water? Of course, it costs a lot of money, but if they can do it in Madrid, in Spain, exactly the same thing, why not do it in New York? Maybe for 50 years from now. Even also the West Side Highway, but anyway, let's go quick. New York, of course, wonderful waterfronts, blah, blah, blah. In Bogotá, we do not have a wonderful river like you have. Ocean, Hudson, East River, amazing waterfronts. We only have some drainage canals. So even though we put some bikeways and pedestrian spaces next to them, and people love it, look what you can do in a very poor neighborhood. Just with a humble drainage canal in a very poor neighborhood. Now, let's go quickly. We don't have time. We're talking about the wonderful High Line. I'm almost about finished. While the pleasures we derive from things we buy in the supermarkets wear out, I mean, as soon as we buy anything in the market, in a shop, it gives less and less pleasure until 1 year later, 2 years later, we almost want to throw it away. Parks are magical. Parks are different public goods. They are not a means. They are an end in itself. Most things that government builds is a means. It's a road. People, we need to go from one place to another. It's a port. It's an airport. But parks are not a means to anything. Parks are an end in itself. They are almost happiness in itself. Parks are a magical good whose capacity to provide joy does not wear out. We can visit them every day, many times a day, and they will still provide joy for years and decades and decades. So I would propose that a good city should feel like a park. Fun, integrated with nature, extremely safe to children, pedestrians, and bicyclists. In every detail, a city should reflect that human beings are sacred and that they are equal. We have only begun in this war to make cities more for people, to make cities where it will not be dangerous to live, where we will not have to be worried that our children are going to get killed. It may take hundreds of years, but I think projects like the High Line and many other wonderful things that are happening all over the world make us very optimistic. Thank you.
Oh, that's for him. Anyway, so I just gotta hand it to Enrique because, honestly, I owe so much of my inspiration for the work that I do to you, and so thank you for being that inspiration to so many of us out there in the world, and for me in particular. So, but I think the main thing that that really struck me from what Enrique said is that, honestly, everyone just simply has the right to be happy and safe everywhere. That is not too much to ask, is it? But it often is, when it does come to communities that we are often working in. And, what I did, when I think about the work that I did up in the South Bronx, I did it specifically because I wanted to use green, as a way to economically empower the community that I was in. So it was a means to an end, and it was a kind of a tool because I saw lots of things happening that didn't support the quality of life for people in communities like the South Bronx to be happy and safe. And so I really just worked to employ a very particular approach that I used, and it was this right here. For everything that we did, it was what we had to figure out a way to identify a market need and propose a solution, and then look to find some kind of angel investment. It could be money, or it could be someone who just believed in you and was willing to sponsor you in some other kind of way. And then you launch a beta version with whatever you got to go. And then you refine your model based on as you implement it in the world. And then you reiterate and you work to expand it. And so what were some of the kind of things that we need that were serious market needs in our community? And right now, or back in the day when I first started my work in the late 90s, we were being told by our city and state that our community should essentially have more garbage dumps. And that our public, that's what our waterfront should be used for. Public space, really should be used for things like more and more waste facilities. So we had to work really hard to think of what are some opportunities out there. And so I thought, what is the exact opposite of a waste handling facility? It's a park. And so fortunately, I got a chance to find, a dump, a place that had been used as a dump for decades on our waterfront. And so the beta version that we've had, we got a little bit of angel investment to just do some pretty serious cleanups on this dump. And the beta version came in the form, the angel investment came in the form of a $10,000 seed grant from the U.S. Forest Service that was giving money to support threatened rivers. And this was our little beta version. We got it cleaned up. We had to talk to everybody from the city and the state, volunteers and businesses to really help make it into this particular version. And then we programmed it because in our community we had a very low percentage of parks to people. So people didn't even really know what to do with it. So we had to figure out ways to get people down to the waterfront. And it came in the form of, we did boat building classes, we did canoe rides. A great group called Rocking the Boat now takes up residence on the site. And then later on, because we did gain international attention about transforming this little dump into a park, we were able to leverage that, and we got $3 million from those guys to turn this, which was then later this, into this. And this is the Hunts Point Riverside Park. And it has been there since 2006, and it's really become this amazing place for the community to be a part of itself and to reflect the kind of beauty that we knew was there for it. And and it just turns out that so it reflects right back on people that are there. I also got married back there back in 2006. Thank you. And that's my dog who actually really pulled me into the park. So she was my flower girl, of course. And so it was this amazing place, not just a great place for a girl to get married, but it also showed, I mean, we brought world-class infrastructure to this community, and expected into the places where it was least expected. And we were actually awarded one of the nation's biggest awards for excellence in urban design. And the next thing that we worked on was the South Bronx Greenway. And again, responding to the market need. Guess what? Pedestrian-friendly transportation within the Bronx. Diabetes and obesity, because people are not getting the kind of physical activity that actually keeps them from getting obese or diabetic in many ways. And so because when parents are feeling like their kids are getting, will go outside and the air is really polluted, or if they get hit by a truck, they'll keep them inside. And stormwater management as well. So because we know that that's a huge cost that the city takes on because they manage stormwater the same exact way they manage city. Or sewage water. And so what we got in our angel investment, it may seem like a lot, it was $1.25 million that came in the form of a federal transportation grant. And that allowed us to create an amazing feasibility and design study that allowed us to come up with the kind of strategy that created a pedestrian, bike, and pathway friendly zone along the waterfront and also within the community. And so this was our beta version. This was simply traffic calming, with a little green thing stuck in the middle. But what it turned into with the result of $50 million worth of an infusion of cash from city, state, federal, and private sources, with 25 million of them which came directly from the economic stimulus package, because I believe we are still the only community-initiated, non-vehicular-based transportation project funded by the economic stimulus package, and it started in the South Bronx. Thank you very much. So, yes, that is worthy of applause, people. Thanks. So again, this is what we started off with, and this is the more robust version of what we're dealing with right now. And again, these big wide streets, how easy could it be for people to, especially older ones and kids, to pass along it? This kind of makes the traffic a lot more mindful of the fact that they're sharing streets with people. And this is my favorite piece, actually. This is because what poor communities often experience, it is this sense of isolation because we are often completely cut off from other communities. And so it's quite deliberate in a lot of the planning circles. However, so a greenway can play a connective role, as you saw in Enrique's presentation so beautifully. This is a bridge that leads you directly from the South Bronx to Randall's Island. Right now, we are separated from them by only 25 feet of water, but this particular project is going to connect the South Bronx to to Randall's Island, which is a 400-acre fabulous park. And so we're really excited about that. But another thing we had to do, because again, in our communities, we didn't have a lot of opportunities for park development, so we really needed an education opportunity to let people know about the impact of why this is so important. And so fortunately, I was able to get help from a few friends, our angel investors. This wonderful man named Barry Single at the Clinton Global Initiative, who supported the development of a group called Greenway Stewards. And what they did, they served this greenway maintenance need, also communication about the importance of greenways and green infrastructure within communities, and then also help people see this. This is one of my favorite stories about this, because what this guy is doing is literally he's pruning this tree, and he's doing it because the branches were so low. People would talk about how much they hated this tree, which seemed like a really strong reaction, but it wasn't that strong a reaction, considering that the low tree branches block the street light across the street from it, so all sorts of illegal activity was happening underneath that tree. And so people hated the tree. And so when they pruned the branches, the low-hanging branches of that tree, what they became was heroes of the neighborhood, because they actually stopped a lot of illicit activity from happening there. So here, what we find is it's called crime prevention through environmental design, and very low cost, incredibly effective ways of making our streets safer. Another wonderful thing they did was build these little tree guards. This was in front of a senior citizen home, and to an aspect of social exclusion, is especially when you become older, a lot of people do feel a little more frail and don't want to walk out in streets the way they once did. So keeping the branches low on this tree, so providing some shade, but also providing a wonderful place for people to literally walk outside their door and get some nice activity and just be a part of the environment was incredibly important. And this is also a strategic crime prevention tool. Not just the old people, but not they're going to do anything about it, but it's called Eyes on the Street. So the more people are outside enjoying the outside, the less likely bad things are going to happen. So creating opportunities like this is very, very important. Another thing that we did was with this particular program was help people understand that they had a right to clean open space. And so we actually did this trailblazing program that literally got people, we just hired a line painter, or rather rented a line painting machine, and then the Greenway stewards painted a line from the neighborhood that connected people to the new parks, and with no explanation whatsoever. And the whole idea was just to get people to think about, follow the line, because people see a path, they're going to follow it for the most part. So that's what that did. But we also used some extra paint and did Clean Up After Your Dog campaign, which was incredibly, incredibly popular. And another thing was also helping to make our local community understand that there were great opportunities, for them to have both a personal as well as a financial stake in improving their quality of life if we looked at the environment in that way. And so we started one of the country's very first green-collar job training and placement systems that allowed people to do just that. And so we trained people in the skills of ecological restoration, from cleaning up contaminated lands to learning how to do green roof installations, to learning urban forestry management, to even there's one more really amazing thing that they did that really helped them understand the value of all sorts of things. But and wetland restoration, of course, because our first work was on the Bronx River. But we were able to boast this kind of success rate, this kind of placement rate, even with the people who had what we call significant barriers to unemployment, which means they were ex-cons or people who were generationally impoverished. So people who had never really seen a family member, who knew how to be a team player, or knew how to, make sure that you're giving your best self and being a leader in your job, if you've never done it, even though some of these guys and gals actually ran successful businesses, they just weren't of the legal sort. We had to make sure that we helped them understand the value of doing it in a real legitimate way, and that's why we were able to support people in this way. And so the interesting thing about all of this is that we've been working really hard to see, what's next. This kind of work that I did when I ran my nonprofit called Sustainable South Bronx, we used it to literally sort of lay the foundation for policies that are kind of normal now. I mean, green-collar job training legislation, rather. Or there are organizations such as the Bronx River Alliance or Green for All that are carrying on that kind of work nationally, which I'm really proud of. But like Enrique, whose good deeds got him almost impeached, no good deed really ever goes unpunished. As a matter of fact, it really doesn't. I myself ended up on the front page of the New York Times a few months ago in an article that was really short on substance, but very long on gossip, because I actually had I offended, many within the green social justice world because I thought about a particular position that was broader than theirs. But, life goes on, and I'm at it again in terms of trying to figure out ways to be as disruptive as I possibly can, because that's what I did with Sustainable South Bronx, and I'm at it again. So now I'm starting a new organization called, called Hometown Security Laboratories. Ooh, schwitzing up here. Or the lab, as we like to call it, and it's all about how do you create disruptive, sustainable, environmentally built solutions. So I'm very excited about that. And so one of the things that I did, in terms of, for the past 5 years since I ran my old organization and now I'm working as a consultant and doing real estate development, was that, especially when I did advisory services around the country, I was taken to the South Bronx of whatever area I was going to, and even internationally as well. We just visited a place in a suburb within Toulouse that was so much like the South Bronx. This was in France, in one of the coolest, oldest cities in the world, and yet the place was really similar in a lot of ways, in terms of everything that it was in terms of poverty, and issues associated with it. And so anyway, so the whole point that I've seen, at least domestically, is that there are really only two kinds of real estate development that we see in poor communities. There's the kind that assumes that the area is going to be gentrified, which means that the place gets nice and then the poor people are going to be displaced and pushed out, or the kind that just assumes that a level of poverty is going to remain in that area. And you see that very clearly in terms of the type of economic developments that are brought into those communities. Everything from, you'll see way more liquor stores than you will see places to buy fresh food. And the kind of grocery stores are really not where you would shop if you had any other kind of option. You'll see things like 99-cent stores, or instead of banks to help you develop your financial equity within your own self, you'll see things like you'll see things like pawn shops or check cashing stores or things of that nature. They're designed to suck the equity out of you. And then you also see huge amounts of super highly subsidized affordable housing. And that's just like the buzzword. What I think that does, it just continues to concentrate poverty and all of the issues associated with it, because nobody is going to live in places where only poor people live if they have an opportunity to do otherwise. And we know this to be true because if you look at some of the unintended consequences of integration in particular, this is, and obviously I think integration was a really good thing. Being from, the granddaughter of a slave, this is really important to me, so I'm not knocking it writ large, but one of the issues, that we tend to forget in our experiences was that in racially segregated communities where blacks were forced to live because they couldn't go anyplace else, those communities were also economically diverse. So it was not uncommon for, say, a black doctor or a black lawyer to live near a black janitor. And so there was a sense of this kind of social cohesion that there was aspirational opportunities within a community because people could see how other folks lived. It was just that simple, because if you don't see it, it's going to be hard for you to even think it and know it. And so when integration happened and those who had the ability to move out of formerly exclusively black neighborhoods into someplace else, guess what they did? Because people should be able to live wherever they want. And I'm certainly never, ever, ever going to knock that, but that's not what we got. And so the hopeful ones, the ones who provided a sense of hope and possibility. The strivers in a community were gone, but what did that leave the rest of our community with? And and that is still true today, because the smart ones, in our community, the hopeful ones, the ones who just, where it's clear that there's a bit of talent in there, we're taught to measure success by how far we can get from our communities. So like for example, when I was 7 and the neighborhood was burning around me and my brother was killed because of a drug war, I was like, I'm a smart kid. I'm going to get a great ed. I'm going to figure out how to get myself into the Bronx High School of Science. And I'm going to use that to get myself into a named school, as I called it, because I knew nobody would care about like a city college or a community college. At 7, I figured this out. And I did, and then I went on to that, but I am grateful that I got a chance to come back home and do the work that I do right now. But I want to figure out a way and really use either the opportunities that we have to create a model, challenge the models that typical kind of, extraction model for communities, for where taking the smart kids out of a community. I want to work to help make those communities better so that people recognize they don't have to move out of their neighborhoods to live in a better one. And I think you can actually strategically do that through very strategic real estate development. And how do you use it as an environmental, economic, and social platform for change? And so one of the things that I noticed and why I think we can do this is because in my travels, I looked around at many, many different cities, right, and realized that in most post-industrial cities in this country, there's sort of a pattern that you see in them. So I think this is, I don't know where it is. Is this red thing your, Okay, well anyway, the orange area, it's the residential area. The blue area is the industrial area. And then there's a little middle area where it's kind of a weird sort of no man's land of planning that happens there. And so I like to think of it as a hinge area. But again, and so that's a very typical pattern that you see. But then if you look around pretty much anywhere you go in post-industrial cities, you'll also be able to find assets that might not be easy to see at first, but they're there if you're looking. So, for example, this is a map of our community up in the South Bronx called Hunts Point. So we've got great access to public transportation. We also have this really cool Greenway that's being built in the middle of it. And so I was like, how do we use that little weird hinge area as a catalyst for the kind of change that we want to see happening? So first of all, there's housing, mixed income housing, because you want affordable housing for folks in the low and moderate income range, but you also want the kind of housing that is attractive to people who actually can afford to leave those neighborhoods if they could, and make it really quality enough so that they'll want to stay. But you also, in terms of the next piece, which is about local economic development, you want to create opportunities so that poor people can become less poor. That is the real thing. I don't think there's anything romantic about poverty. There is nothing romantic about poverty. I am much more interested in moving people out of poverty very strategically so that they don't have to stay there. I know that the Bible says there'll always be the poor among us, but I don't think they have to be the same one. So yeah, I understand that that's a really bizarrely radical in design, but it is the absolute truth, and it's what I live by. So in terms of how do we help make poor people less poor, specifically, create the kind, or actually attract the kind of industries that are on an economic trend that going upwards. So we know now some of those things are technology. Some of the jobs within tech right now have some lower barriers to entry than people like to think. Everyone doesn't have to be an engineer to actually make a decent living. The other manufacturing in the 21st century is also another really interesting opportunity. I don't think that urban areas are great places to grow huge quantities of food, but it is great places to actually prepare them for value-added products, and that is, I think, a very healthy, robust market. And apparel. Some types of apparel, it's becoming less and less attractive to do them overseas, and so I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So again, new career tracks for people, that can be trained for accessible jobs within our community. And also public space, as we've heard from Enrique, it is the great democratizer. As long as you create the kind of places that people feel comfortable going into and put them as close as possible to where they are, they will be used, make them attractive and wonderful. So having world-class, fabulous open space, that's what's important here as well. And of course you have things like green markets and plazas that make people happy. And of course commercial and retail. One of the main reasons why so many folks, I'm not the only person from my local high school, IS 74, or junior high school rather, to do well for herself. In my neighborhood. I am one of the few that decided to stay in my neighborhood because, it's hard to get a decent cup of coffee. It's hard to go out. There is no real place to shop. People, when you get to a certain economic level, there are things you want. And if you move someplace else, you can get them fairly easily, even affordably. I personally get on the subway, the 6 train in Hunts Point to go downtown and shop at Fairways at 86th Street because the produce is cheaper and way better than it is in the poorest congressional district in the country. So those are the type of things that people will leave our community to experience as well. But they also provide for having those type of things in our communities, which are not amenities, mind you, but they also provide for dollars to circulate throughout the community, and they also provide, along with public space, a great way for people to be outside as often as possible, which also helps decrease crime and provides more senses of community activity. And so on the technology things, the kind of things that we're working to bring into our community, one is tech. So back in 2006, I worked with MIT to bring in a fab lab, which is short for fabrication laboratory. And it's when you mix personal computers with fabrication machines, things like milling machines and laser jet cutters and things of that nature, and you really are only limited by what you know how to program. And our students started working with Scratch. As that program, to make it work. And so what we wanted to bring that in, so rapid prototyping is the name of the technology, that kind of customized manufacturing. And so it's being used right now for everything from clothing to there's a surgeon out there that's using it to make organs for human transplant. Like, obviously you couldn't do that in this particular facility, but it was definitely enough for people to feel as though, with our community, to feel like creators and inventors in their own right. And that was an important thing for us to do. It also helped use it as a great learning tool because, again, our community was often thought of as a repository for much of the city's waste. So building out, so having people take a different look at what waste was also a really important thing for us to do. So, for example, some of the young folks that went through this program were able to see these pallet boxes that where stuff was shipped in on and then torn apart and then just thrown into a truck and then landfilled in somebody else's community. They pulled these pallet boxes apart, lashed them together, figured out a program so they can put them through this machine. And then they created a nice little side business for furniture making made out of trash. And so this was a wonderful, wonderful side hustle for some of the young people that went through the program. And now we're starting our own technology and education and entrepreneurship program called Startup Box South Bronx. And the idea is to help move our community from simply being tech consumers to tech producers. So we've got both a dedicated youth program and also we're going to be launching some programming for adults to really help lessen the time so that we can increase their opportunities for participation in the tech economy through speaking engagements and also seminars and trainings just within the local community. So again, it's not the extractive type of let's take people out of the neighborhood, but we're going to be building this right in the South Bronx and hoping to see it nationally as well. And so just for the youth development component, which we launched that last year, some of the kids, especially this one sitting right dead in the middle, her name is April, and she actually started developing some apps, and within 2 weeks was learning how to code, had coded and developed her own apps, and now a few of them are available on Google Play. And we also started the very first Bronx Tech Meetup. We never had one in the Bronx before because we knew that there was a lot of interest in technology and lots of people that worked in the tech community within the Bronx, but they were leaving the Bronx to actually experience it. So another component, and so this was a gathering place for us all, and we're going to be contributing to New York City's digital roadmap about how we can make tech even greater in the Bronx as well. And also we're going to be working specifically to bring, to really encourage different tech companies to locate at least part of their operations in the Bronx. And we're going to show that there will be a willing and trainable workforce that's going to be available for them as well. And so we're hoping that some of those things will be at this particular site, which we're actually hopefully going to be competing to redevelop as soon as it comes out for an RFP. It's a former juvenile detention facility, mind you. Hasn't been used that way for years. But this particular site, I think, is a perfect example of what's wrong about the kind of planning that goes on in these hinge areas. Because the site, when it was originally zoned, was just a jail. That's it. So what was built on the other side of it? Not much. It was treated like, again, that no man's land. And so what you've got some truck parking lots, an engine rebuilding site, things of that nature. But what the area is really known for is a good place for a trucker to come in and pick up a prostitute late at night. That's what it's known for. But that probably wouldn't even be a consideration on a place like this. And that's the point. You build out your public space in a way that kind of forces good behavior. That's what good public space does. And we're really excited about seeing that kind of thing happen there. And so the point of this is not to just say that we want to create just this beautiful little, pearl in the middle of, surrounded by this muscle with nothing else around it. But no, what we're saying is that we want to raise the bar for what passes for real estate development in poor communities right now. Because again, I don't think either gentrifying a neighborhood or just assuming that it's going to stay poor and beat up are particularly creative things to do with people. So with that, we're expecting to raise the bar, and this particular approach that we have is going to help that. And so again, just the idea of this being changed to something like this, and that this would be considered normal, is what we're trying to look forward to. And so to start that's a much longer term project. That's actually a 6-acre project that we're hoping to win the RFP on. So we're starting a little smaller. This is actually only a 5,000 square foot space. It's an abandoned rail station that was designed by Cass Gilbert, who's the same architect that did the Woolworth building. Before he got really famous, he was doing beautiful little rail stations, which you can't tell how beautiful this thing is. But it's got a little bit, it needs a little help. But anyway, Amtrak, who owns it now, shut it down last year and just kicked out all the tenants. And for someone who grew up in an area where there were a lot of abandoned buildings at the time, having literally a whole street of shuttered buildings sent a chill down my spine. So I got Amtrak to negotiate with me to obtain a long-term lease on this site. And so that's happening. But in the meantime, we realized that having a shuttered building was not the nicest way for people to move about into the gateway of a community, because this is literally how most people enter the neighborhood. The subway's right across the street. And so we were able to hire a group of young kids from the community not volunteer, we paid them to actually do this work, to go take this project from start to finish in terms of coming up with an idea to help make that place a safer pedestrian experience for people. And the idea of paying them was so that they could feel the power of understanding that they could work to create the kind of great good in their own community. So again, they assessed the situation and then worked with a professional artist to come up with a kind of easily executable design, and then implemented it as well. And these young people became heroes in the community for taking what was a blighted site and turning it into something that was quite beautiful. And we're really very pleased to know that it went from this to this. And as we work to create and finance a plan for a cafe that'll serve as an anchor tenant, and also have room for multiple vendors inside, and also a kind of what would be considered a community resource for us, the kind of spa that people leave our neighborhood to experience, and have that all in this little building that'll be actually a very welcoming way for people to connect with us. This is one of my favorite quotes in all the world, because this is exactly how I feel every single day. This particular quote was written by Dr. King it was a part of a letter from a Birmingham jail. And it was, he was really just talking about where he was in terms of expecting equality for all folks. And I also want you to think about the fact that when Dr. King died, where was he? He was in Memphis, Tennessee, working with black sanitation workers because they were doing the worst jobs for the least amount of money, as black sanitation workers within the city of Memphis. And so he was down there fighting on behalf of their, not just racial equality, but their environmental equality, and also their economic equality. And that is exactly what I think when we plan our cities, when we plan the most vulnerable places in our city, with a high expectation that they can be excellent, that we can use space done well in a way that democratizes how people make a living, how they can help support their quality of life, improve their health. All of those things are really what we do, because everyone does have a right to being safe and happy everywhere. And that is how we show that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one in order to have the kind of lives that we all deserve to live. Thank you very much.
Is it working?
Just a little bit.
Hi, my name is Maria Torres. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Friends of the High Line. Thanks to everyone for joining us here tonight, and especially thanks to Majora and Enrique for such incredibly inspiring and provocative presentations. So we have time for a few questions. Cards were distributed earlier, and I believe FHL staff should be walking around to take those cards, and we're also taking questions. If people want to send their questions via Twitter to the hashtag is Highline Talks, we can also take the questions there. But why don't I start it off with this question. If you were building the High Line, what would you have done differently?
Let's see. I think what I would have done differently is work to, okay, let me just, you know what, I'm not going to do the politically correct thing. What I think I would have done was also, you know, considering just the level of interest and support simply because of the geographic location that this particular location was going to get, you know, and support from real estate all over, you know, in this area. I think I would have said, I would have pushed the city to use their influence to make sure that other places around the Bronx that were trying to build parks also got the same kind of support.
Well, of course, as Majora says, one of the risky things is that sometimes the higher income areas get better maintained parks, but that's what I would suggest in terms of design. I like to make clear that I'm not an urbanist, I'm not an architect, I'm not, I don't know what I am, but I am a lover of cities and I work in this. Maybe to put some more spaces, maybe more cafes or things above, maybe perhaps, so that. But in general, I think it's a beautiful project.
Yeah.
I really think it's an amazing design, a beautiful concept. Maybe I would link it in a better way to the Hudson River Park, maybe with some pedestrian bridge that you could come up from there or something. But this is just a matters of design. I'm not an expert in this. I just think it's very beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a nutshell, obviously, I mean, it is awesome. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So, yeah, I feel the same way.
Okay. The next question is, can you talk about some cities, whether it's within the U.S. or internationally, that you believe are doing the most innovative, interesting work in terms of open space development, in particular achieving equity through open space development?
Well, obviously, Bogotá is one of them. Like a huge inspiration.
I have this microphone here, so I don't need this microphone. It's yours, Maria. No. Happily, everywhere in the world, I think we are realizing that pedestrian space is important. And of course, the Netherlands, with this bicycle infrastructure they have, I think they are always an example. But I think in some other cases, but I believe that I don't see yet something crazy like I would dream about. And especially in developing country cities which are going to grow. Most Indian cities will be at least 10 times bigger in 50 or 60 years. 10 times. I mean, just in China, we were reading that they will expect to move 250 million new people to cities, 250 million over the next 12 years. No, not 100 years, but 12. So you could do totally different cities. So I would think it's so easy to do something different in developing world. For example, it's important to remember that in the developing world there is no winters. Most of the developing world, except for Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia and a few other very cold places, mostly it's tropical areas. So it would be very easy to have thousands of miles of pedestrian and bicycle-only streets with shaded by giant tropical trees. You could crisscross cities in all directions. You could have also, for example, subways are extremely expensive. Here, the 2nd Avenue line is costing $1.7 billion per mile. I mean, that's a little more expensive than average, but still, you could easily have mass transit systems if you would just live in the new cities you're doing from scratch in Greenland, just spaces just for roads, just for buses and bicycles and pedestrians, or trams. I mean, in general, if possible in new cities, why put public transport users underground? So what good cities are doing. Every city, happily in the world, most cities are doing wonderful things. Yeah. But I dream of something more radical, which I don't see yet.
I have a question from the audience, Majora. This is a great one for you. How do you prevent mixed income housing rents from increasing when you create income accessible mixed use communities?
Well, some of them will increase. I mean, what we're interested in doing is harnessing the power of gentrification, not just assuming that there's only one way to do it. I mean, think about, what technology has done with the sun and with wind power. If it's just all over the place, then yeah, then it will just like run over you, it'll just burn you, whatever. But when it's harnessed, you can make it run cars. You can make it do all sorts of things. And that's what I think we need to do with gentrification, because the bottom line is there are things about gentrifying communities that poor people would like. They would like the communities to be safer. They would like to have better access to goods and services that they do not have in their communities. So poor people like nice things too. So I think we need to just understand that from the get-go. And also what we're trying to do, especially with the model that we're building, we're not talking about displacing anyone. It's about new development. And you can build out new development, of a certain particular type that does involve mixed income, that involves higher than normal rents in that community. Also, let's not forget in New York City how much in poor communities we have artificially inflated the rents in poor communities because of the subsidies associated with them. Like, for example, a rent, in my neighborhood, you can find a 3-bedroom apartment, if unsubsidized, for about, 3-bedroom apartment, unsubsidized for about $1,600. The same apartment, because of rent subsidies associated with it, can fetch about $2,200. So guess what? Everyone wants a subsidized apartment, which means that we just continue to bring in, poor folks landlords will want those higher rents, even though there's tons of people who would prefer to stay in our communities, but can't really afford $2,200, but can afford $1,600. So they'll move out of our neighborhoods in order to get something like that. But so let's also understand that we've artificially inflated that particular market as well. So the other piece that's really important is that we want to attract those type of people of higher incomes, simply because it does provide a sense of economic stability within our communities. And the other part of it is that at the same time we're building mixed income housing, we also want to build out economic developments that provide poor folks with the training to move into those so they become less poor. So I am hoping that low-income housing in communities like ours is transitional, which means that there's an assumption that poor people will not stay poor. They can actually move out of poverty, which is really the American way, but I think we've kind of forgotten that.
Thanks. It looks like one of the audience members here is throwing back a question that you, Enrique, posed in your presentation. Should local residents, in fact, have more of a say in the design and use of open space?
I don't think so. I think this is very undemocratic, and I think this is generally the way, for example, this is exactly one of the ways in which we give a different treatment to public space for cars and public space for people. We must remember that both roads, highways, and sidewalks and parks are public space. Legally, both are the same. Public space, but one is the public space for cars and one is the public space for people. And usually when a road is going to be built in the US for a long time, no big roads have been built, but when they were being built, you use eminent domain and to put the road anywhere that you needed to put it. As of course is the way this should be done. And airports and ports and everything, but whenever you're going to do public pedestrian space, then the treatment is different. For example, it's wonderful that some generous people give money to the High Line or to Central Park, but you never find that a public space for cars needs private donors. You need private donors for public space for children, but not for public space for cars. And then again, so I believe that this idea that neighbors have more of a say or more of a right of public space next to their home is not very democratic, because as I give the example, for example, I don't think the people who live in the apartments next to Central Park have more of a right to Central Park than some children from the South Bronx. They don't have more of a right to it. I think, by the way, people here think it's very cute and very nice, the park in Gramercy Park, which is locked. I mean, I hope they do pay for property tax for this park, because it's completely mad. This is really a public park and they only allow the neighbors in there. I think this may be a cute historical anecdote, but I think it's extremely undemocratic and crazy. And I hope that if this is really, that they are paying for property tax for this. But in general, again, I say, for example, I'll give you an example related to Colombia. Many people in upper middle class neighborhoods used to gate the parks, to put a gate, because they said there was crime and all this, so they would close the parks next to their, and I would say, even if only one little girl, once every 5 years, maybe the daughter of a maid in a nearby neighborhood wanted to go into this park and she could not go, just because of that, this park should never be gated. I do not think the neighbors have more of a right to public space than those who do not live there. Or in the discussion in 10th Street, where the neighbors who wanted to park cars were effectively able to block the city from getting rid of parking in order to make a bicycle way. So I myself don't think this is a very democratic way of approaching the issue, but this is for discussion.
Majora, I wonder if you share the same perspective and how we think about that issue and reconcile it with what has become, in a lot of communities, the development of an open space and the participation in the planning as a tool for community empowerment and participation. How do we think about those two things?
Yeah, it is a tool for participation and empowerment, but unfortunately, and I think Enrique is very much right on this subject, in particular parks, even especially I think by our administration, it's viewed more as amenities rather than real legitimate parts of what makes a community a community. So I'll give you an example, but some of my work actually didn't get funded, even though we got the funding in place, but it didn't get built because the city came back to us and said, oh my gosh, unless you can build out the kind of maintenance that, say, the High Line can do, we don't know if we should be building those parks in the South Bronx. So the idea that there were these public-private partnerships to maintain fabulous spaces because they were considered, obviously not private, but in some cases that it was a part of that the care of them was not a public responsibility. That I thought was just obscene. And it is obscene that parks are considered amenities, and that we would have to find someone to come up with additional money to maintain them. And honestly, there are parks within New York City who are struggling with having the city, them understanding that there needs to be budget allocated to maintain those parks, because parks that are not maintained become not just eyesores, but they do cost money in terms of crime that happens there, in terms of accidents that can happen there. So it doesn't make sense that they're considered amenities when they build community pride, when they help support community ownership, and respect for their own community. That stuff is priceless. And that's something that we need to build out as a real policy model for parks and open space all over our city. And we're far from that now, unfortunately.
I'd like to make clear that I did not say that neighbors should not have influence in how the park is designed or something, or the public space, but when we are talking about exclusion, that's when the issue gets difficult. And when you're putting cars, instead of allowing a bikeway to go through, this issue of how to distribute street space is very powerful. Who should decide? The neighbors who are parking there? If we were going to make a road for cars, I am sure we would not be worrying about what the neighbors think. This is why you use eminent domain, and it has been used in the United States forever, and in any democracy. But now when you're going to put the 10th Street bikeway instead of some parked cars, so the neighbors are able to block this. Happily, the neighbors, or some neighbors, in another case in Brooklyn, were not able to win the legal battle.
Okay. This next question is about what it means to be disruptive. Majora, you, in your presentation, and certainly Enrique, it seems like each of your work has involved disrupting the status quo in one form or the other. The question is how, what did you find to be successful in disrupting or convincing decision makers, the public, the relevant constituencies to embrace your work? Or is that actually the opposite of disruptive and it entails affecting change in spite of those constituencies?
Okay. Oh. Well, the first part is, well, the first and the second part, they're both disruptive. Because, you know, you've got a big idea that hasn't really been done before. I mean, you're bound to piss somebody off sooner or later. And frankly, I think if it's not really big, it's probably not worth doing. But the other piece around that is that if it is that big, you're probably going to need some help. So the other disruptive piece is making sure that you can find and what the self-interests of the folks that you need to help you are, you know, in terms of the ability to work with various policymakers, you know, and people who are, you know, may even be considered at odds with you on one thing, but can be supportive of you on another. And it is this really interesting kind of dance that you have to learn how to do. Sometimes it's learning how to speak another language that you know, is of what the language of you know, someone who might be considered an opponent. It is all about creating strange bedfellows and figuring out what makes them all happy. Because that really, and especially if you're coming from a place where the project that you're working on, you know, is not considered a part of the dominant, well, the status quo means that it's not dominant, but when it's really outside the realm of what the dominant culture expects from a community.
I think that many times we are so used to things that we do not see horrible inequality before our noses. For example, when we think about changing the French Revolution, today we say, oh, that's very obvious. It should have changed because the injustice was so flagrant. But it was not so obvious because thousands of years had gone by and people thought it was normal. But let's not go so far as the French Revolution. 70 years ago in the United States, African Americans had to give their seat in a bus to a white person. Not only that, 70 years or 80 years ago, women could not vote for president in the United States. And people thought this was normal. It was not fascists or Nazis who thought women should not vote. I mean, the grandparents or the great-grandparents of all of people here thought this was normal and very nice. I mean, women should not vote. And if you should have suggested they should vote, they would have laughed at you. Well, in the same way, I think today, in front of our noses, we have some amazing injustice. But we are so used to this that we think this is normal. For example, I remember, democracy is not just the fact that people vote. Democracy is that the Constitution is obeyed, and the first article in the Constitution says all citizens are equal before the law. And if that is the case, then public good prevails over private interest. Now, I'll give you two examples. For example, a bus in traffic. Clearly, this is totally irrational technically. I mean, it's clearly, it doesn't take PhDs from MIT, you know. A committee of 12-year-old children will find in half an hour that the most efficient way to use scarce road space is with exclusive lanes for buses. Or the Long Island Sound private waterfronts. You know, clearly, this is totally undemocratic. If this is true that public good prevails over private interest, the Long Island waterfront should be public, and there should be some beautiful public pedestrian walkway all around it. But then we are so used to this that if I say this sounds like communism or some crazy thing, you know? But, so again, when you talk of disruptive, many times, I think disrupting is just looking at something that we are so used to them every day, like we think it's so normal that we should have cars parked along the street. Why? Who said so? Who decided? Did anybody vote on this?
Okay. One more question, and this is a good one. It's a good one to end on. If you were to give New York City a letter grade in terms of how it is doing in open space development, in particular in achieving equity through open space development, what would it be? And assuming it's not an A, what do we need to do to improve?
In particular around equity. Okay, I'd give it a C minus, and particularly around the issue that in poor communities, parks are considered an amenity still, and that maintenance is still considered this add-on thing instead of something that is crucially important. And until we can do that for every park in New York City, then they will get a C plus from me.
Enrique?
I think fantastic things have been done in New York over the last few years, including what Majora has done in the South Bronx. And of course, she has been able to get support and funds from government. And so this is part of the wonderful things that have been done. Of course, we would want much more, but I think all what has been done by Janet Sadiq Khan with the Bikeways and the improvement in pedestrian spaces is fantastic. I mean, if we look at the 20 years, what has been done in the Hudson Riverfront, in the East River, I think is amazing, and it has become an example to the world, because sometimes, I mean, the High Line and you know, many times things happen in some cities which influence the planet. For example, the Netherlands had always had bicycles and bikeways, and nobody cared, you know. But as soon as the French put their bell and everything, you know, it was the revolution. And now there must be 200 cities, including New York, that has shared bicycles, public bicycles. And what New York is doing has a tremendous influence all over the world. Today I saw an article in the New York Times, or yesterday, because I saw it on the internet. And they were criticizing Bloomberg because they said, oh, Bloomberg is having so much impact in the rest of the world in things that he has not solved in New York. And I think this is not a criticism, it's wonderful. What New York does has great impact. If I am going to make a presentation anywhere in the world and I tell them, look, in Manhattan, they took half the space away from Broadway, from cars, to give it to pedestrians. I mean, and so I believe New York is doing fantastic things, more and more bicycles. Of course, you can do many more things, but clearly many, many things have been done. There are some fantastic NGOs working on this. I find that the political campaign for mayor is really weak in this area of public pedestrian space and bicycles. I don't see that this is being touched very valiantly, but I hope whoever wins will be very tough when they win. But I think New York is really becoming an example to the world in many ways, and I only dream that it will become more and more radical towards the future.
Great. Thank you both again very much. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We hope to see you again at our next Beyond the High Line series. Have a great evening.